The first thing I noticed about Mirror Lake was its silence. Not the gentle kind, like a quiet afternoon in the woods, but a suffocating hush that pressed down on me the moment I stepped out of my RV. Even the usual sounds of a forest, birds, rustling leaves, a distant breeze, were absent. It was as if everything had stopped, waiting for something. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the discomfort. I'd come here for inspiration after all. Mirror Lake was supposed to be a hidden gem, a place where the water was so still that it reflected the world perfectly, untouched by any ripple or disturbance. A place where I could find peace and maybe capture something extraordinary for my sketches. The lake stretched before me, perfectly smooth, a flawless reflection of the dense trees that lined its banks and the sky above. It was breathtaking, like looking into another world, a twin universe captured in glass. I took out my sketchbook, eager to capture the serenity of the scene. As I settled in, I couldn't help but stare at my own reflection in the water. I'd always been fascinated by how mirrors could distort or reveal things we don't notice in ourselves. My reflection stared back, calm, unblinking, and eerily still. But then, as I reached for my pencil, I thought I saw it. Just a slight delay in its movement. A split second where my hand moved, but my reflection didn't. I shook my head, brushing it off as fatigue. The drive here had been long, and I was exhausted. Still, I couldn't deny that something about my reflection felt off. Its expression seemed colder, sharper, like a faintly warped version of myself. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But even as I sketched, I found myself glancing at the lake, drawn back to my reflection. That night, I sat outside by the fire, the lake's glassy surface still visible just beyond the edge of the flames. The silence felt heavier now, as if the night itself was leaning in, watching me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, the same feeling you get when someone's staring at you. Curiosity got the best of me, and I found myself walking toward the shore, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. As I approached the water, the beam illuminated my reflection again, but this time it wasn't exactly me. My reflection looked back with an intensity I didn't recognize, a slight smirk twisting the edges of its mouth. I raised my hand slowly and it followed, but the movement was wrong. Too sharp, too deliberate. My heart hammered as I took a step back, watching as my reflection's smirk faded into something darker, a look of hunger. I stumbled back to the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, telling myself I was being ridiculous. It was just water after all, but that night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted version of myself staring back, as if it were waiting for something. The next morning, I shook off the unease from the night before, determined not to let my mind ruin this trip. The forest around Mirror Lake was gorgeous, full of wildflowers and massive trees draped in moss. I spent the morning hiking, taking in the beauty, and for a while, I managed to forget about the strange reflection. But when I returned to the lake around midday, it was waiting. My reflection was sharper, more vivid, as if it were closer to the surface of the water. It seemed almost eager, like it was pressing up against the thin layer separating us. I knelt by the water, studying it, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But as I stared, I noticed that my reflection's eyes weren't quite right. They were too bright, too intense, and they were watching me with an unsettling focus. I waved a hand in front of my face, expecting the reflection to mirror the movement. It did, but not exactly. My reflection's fingers moved too slowly, curling in a way that didn't match mine. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and I backed away. "It's just a reflection," I muttered, trying to ground myself. But as I turned, I could have sworn I saw it smirk again, that same twisted, hungry expression that had haunted my dreams. I forced myself back to the RV, locking the door, the sense of unease settling in my chest like a weight. The silence pressed down harder than ever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, lurking just beneath the surface of the lake. That night, I couldn't stay away. I sat by the fire trying to focus on anything but the lake, but every so often my eyes drifted back, drawn to that mirror-like surface. And then, just as the fire began to die down, I saw it. My reflection was standing by the edge of the lake, watching me from across the water. I froze, staring, my heart pounding. I was sitting by the fire, and yet, there I was, standing by the lake's edge, watching myself with that same unnerving intensity. I raised my hand to wave, hoping it would mirror me, but it didn't. Instead, it took a step forward, its eyes locked onto mine, a smirk twisting its lips. I backed up, stumbling over my own feet as I watched it take another step, moving closer to the shore, its gaze never wavering. I scrambled back, tripping over roots and rocks, but the reflection continued to advance, its expression almost predatory. I turned and ran to the RV, locking myself inside, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I pressed myself against the door, listening, half expecting to hear footsteps outside. But there was nothing, only that oppressive silence pressing down on me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every so often, I'd peek out the window, expecting to see that twisted version of myself lurking in the shadows. But the forest was empty, quiet, the lake still as glass. The next morning, I packed up, determined to leave Mirror Lake behind. But as I threw my bags into the RV, I felt an odd compulsion, an almost physical pull to the lake. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on getting out of there, but the urge grew stronger, more insistent, until I found myself standing by the shore once more. There it was, my reflection, waiting for me. Its eyes gleamed with a strange, hungry light, its smile sharp and knowing. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I stared back, unable to look away. And then it spoke. "Come closer," it whispered, its voice a distorted echo of mine. "You're almost there." I took a step back, shaking my head, but the reflection's smile only widened. "Don't you want to see what's on the other side?" it asked, its tone laced with mockery. "Aren't you curious?" I couldn't breathe. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, held by the intensity of its gaze. "Just reach out," it whispered. "You know you want to." I felt my hand lifting, moving towards the surface of the water, drawn to it, even as every instinct screamed at me to stop. The reflection's hand rose to meet mine, its eyes gleaming with anticipation. Our fingertips touched, the water cold and sharp like ice. Suddenly, I felt a strong grip on my wrist pulling me forward, and I stumbled, losing my balance, feeling myself being drawn into the lake. I tried to pull back, but the grip was relentless, dragging me closer to the surface, where my reflection's eyes blazed with a twisted joy. I fought, struggling against the pull, managing to wrench myself back at the last second. I fell onto the shore, gasping for air, watching as the reflection's hand slowly withdrew, its face twisting into an expression of frustration. But as I scrambled to my feet, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The reflection was still there, standing just beneath the surface of the water, watching me. And then, slowly, it smiled, mouthing 2 words, "Next time." I didn't hesitate. I ran to the RV, fired up the engine, and didn't look back. The lake disappeared in the rearview mirror as I sped down the narrow forest road, my heart racing, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. But even now, miles away from Mirror Lake, I can't shake the feeling that it isn't over. Every so often, I catch a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror, and it feels wrong. Like it's watching me with that same twisted smirk, waiting for the next time I'm close to water, waiting for me to look just a little too long. And deep down, I know it's still there, that dark, hungry version of me, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for another chance to cross over. Shadow Valley felt like a place the world had forgotten. The fog clung to the trees, thick and dense, swirling in heavy drifts that muffled every sound. I parked my RV at the edge of the valley, staring out at the mist-filled forest that stretched before me. This place had a reputation, one that made most people stay away, but I'd never been one to let ghost stories keep me from exploring. My name's Nina, and I'd come here alone, hoping to capture the beauty of the valley for my travel blog. I'd read whispers online, hints about ancient legends, the whisperers, people called them, spirits who haunted the valley, restless guardians who didn't take kindly to outsiders. The local lore only added to the thrill. I grabbed my camera and a light jacket, feeling an odd thrill as I stepped out, letting the fog swallow me whole. The silence was immediate, pressing down like a weight, as if the valley itself had sucked up every sound. The air was dense, damp, and charged with something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The trail into the valley was faint, barely more than a suggestion of a path winding between ancient trees. As I walked, I noticed strange symbols carved into some of the trunks, figures with hollow eyes watching from the shadows. My curiosity piqued. I snapped a few photos, making a mental note to research them later. The carvings felt old, worn by years of weather, yet each figure looked disturbingly alive, as if the forest itself had eyes. A chill crept over me, but I shook it off. Just local art, I muttered to myself, more to fill the silence than anything. As the day wore on, I ventured deeper into the valley, the fog clinging close, almost as if it was trying to hold me back. Eventually, I stumbled upon an old stone circle, hidden in a grove of twisted, ancient trees. The stones were weathered and uneven, arranged in a rough circle, each etched with more of those strange carvings. There was an eerie beauty about it, the kind of thing that felt almost sacred. I stepped into the circle, my boots crunching on the damp ground, and raised my camera. The stones had a haunting quality in the soft light, and I lost myself in capturing the angles, the way the fog wrapped around the stones like a veil. A low, faint sound echoed through the valley, so soft I almost missed it. I froze, my pulse quickening. It was like whispering, just on the edge of hearing, a murmur that drifted through the fog and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I strained to listen, my breath catching in my throat. Nina. The whisper seemed to slip through the mist, too close, but when I turned there was no one there. I shivered, trying to laugh it off. Just the wind, I muttered, but my voice sounded thin in the stillness. I backed out of the stone circle, suddenly feeling like I'd crossed a line, like I'd stepped somewhere I wasn't welcome. The fog thickened around me, curling through the trees in strange patterns, almost forming shapes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. That night, back at the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The valley was silent and dark, the fog pressing against the windows, swallowing the world outside. I told myself it was just nerves, the weight of the legends seeping into my mind. But then, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. The whispering, soft and insistent, like voices carried on the breeze. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. The voices were just outside, so faint I couldn't make out words, but unmistakably human. My pulse quickened as I grabbed my flashlight, peering out into the mist. Shadows shifted beyond the glass, just at the edge of the fog. For a moment, I thought I saw figures standing there, their faces obscured, watching the RV with hollow, empty eyes. I blinked, and the figures vanished, swallowed by the mist. My hand trembled as I lowered the flashlight, taking a shaky breath. "It's just your mind playing tricks," I whispered, trying to calm myself. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next day, I woke with a heavy sense of dread, but curiosity drove me back into the valley. I felt an odd compulsion, a pull that was both thrilling and terrifying, like the valley itself was drawing me in. The fog was thicker today, almost unnatural, swirling in dense, shifting waves that made it hard to see. As I hiked deeper, I began to hear faint whispers again, weaving through the trees, growing louder the farther I went. Each step felt heavier, the fog wrapping around me, pressing close as if it wanted to keep me there. I soon found myself back at the stone circle, though I didn't remember taking any turns. It was like the valley had led me here, bringing me back to the place I'd disturbed. My mouth went dry as I stared at the stones, feeling an overwhelming urge to apologize, to say something, anything to break the silence. I didn't mean to intrude," I whispered, my voice shaking. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, a language I didn't understand, voices that seemed to overlap, blending into an eerie, otherworldly chant. I turned, trying to find the source, but there was no one there. The shadows shifted in the fog, moving closer, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. Panicking, I backed away, stumbling out of the stone circle. The whispers followed, chasing me through the trees, filling my mind with a growing sense of dread. That night, I huddled in the RV, every nerve on edge. The whispers had stopped, but the valley was too quiet, the fog so thick it was like being trapped in a cloud. My flashlight barely cut through it, illuminating only shadows that seemed to shift and twist. Then, just as I started to calm down, the fog outside began to move, swirling faster, forming shapes. Faces appeared in the mist, faces with hollow, watching eyes, expressions twisted in silent accusation. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, unable to tear my gaze away. The fog pressed against the windows, the faces growing clearer, and I could hear the whispers again, louder now, insistent. They were saying something, words that twisted and echoed, filling the air with an ancient grief and anger that seemed to seep into my bones. I wanted to leave, to drive out of the valley and never look back, but I felt rooted in place, unable to move. The fog wrapped around the RV, pressing close, the faces staring at me from every side, and I knew I couldn't escape. The whispers grew louder, a chant that filled the air, rising to a fever pitch. Shadows flickered outside, figures moving through the fog, their eyes glowing faintly. I could feel their anger, their sorrow, pressing down on me like a weight, and I realized that they were the whisperers, the spirits I'd heard about. I'd disturbed their sacred ground, crossed a line I hadn't understood. Desperation clawed at me as I realized what I had to do. I grabbed my camera, my voice trembling as I spoke into the darkness. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I just wanted to see." The whispering stopped, the fog going still as if it were listening. With shaking hands, I reached into my bag, pulling out the only thing I had to offer. My favorite necklace, a small silver pendant that had belonged to my grandmother. It was my last connection to her, my most cherished possession. I held it tightly, feeling a pang of loss as I stepped outside into the fog. The faces watched me, their eyes hollow and ancient, and I felt the weight of their gaze as I knelt by the edge of the stone circle. I placed the pendant at the foot of one of the stones, bowing my head in a silent plea for forgiveness. "Please," I whispered, "let me go." The fog swirled, shifting around me, and I felt a sudden calm wash over the valley, a silence that felt almost peaceful. I didn't wait. I backed away slowly, feeling the eyes on me, but the anger had faded, replaced by something softer, a sadness that lingered in the air. I made my way back to the RV, my pulse racing, and climbed inside, locking the door behind me. As dawn broke, the fog began to lift, the valley returning to an eerie calm. I packed up as quickly as I could, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me, leaving a strange ache in my chest. I felt as if I'd barely escaped with my life, but I knew I couldn't leave without a sense of loss. As I drove out of Shadow Valley, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of the forest. Just before the valley disappeared from view, I thought I saw something, a face in the mist, watching me. A faint whisper drifting through the air saying goodbye. And I knew that a part of me would never leave Shadow Valley, that the memory of those hollow eyes and the weight of that ancient sorrow would stay with me, a reminder of what I'd encountered in the fog-filled shadows of the valley. I arrived at Ash Hollow just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the rolling hills. The air was cold and still, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. I parked my RV in a secluded clearing near a trailhead, surrounded by grass and the faint outlines of ancient petroglyphs etched into rocky outcroppings. The place felt timeless, a monument to the past, and the sense of isolation suited me. I was here to rediscover something of myself, too. I'd always loved history, and Ash Hollow's significance as a stop on the Oregon Trail seemed like the perfect destination for my journey, a place steeped in stories, even if I was the only one listening. As I set up camp, I noticed a particular cave etched into the side of the hill, barely visible in the fading light. Curiosity tugged at me, and before I knew it, I was hiking up the narrow trail toward it, my flashlight casting eerie shadows along the rocky path. Inside the cave, the air was cool and thick with the scent of damp earth. I traced the beam of my flashlight over the walls, illuminating petroglyphs so faint they looked like whispers carved in stone. My eyes lingered on one in particular, a large circle surrounded by smaller symbols, strange geometric shapes that seemed to shift if I looked at them too long. I reached out, running my fingers along the rough edges of the carving, feeling an odd, tingling chill spread up my arm. And then, nothing. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my RV. Bright daylight streamed through the window, and I sat up with a start, my mind foggy and disoriented. The last thing I remembered was the petroglyph in the cave. My flashlight was still in my hand, the batteries dead. Had I fallen asleep in the cave? But I was here, in my RV, the sun high in the sky. A full night had passed, yet I couldn't remember leaving the cave, let alone making my way back. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unsettling sensation in my chest. Probably just exhaustion. It had been a long drive out here after all. I shrugged it off and decided to focus on my day, determined to make the most of my time in Ash Hollow. But as I prepared breakfast, an odd feeling crept over me. I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, like I was missing something important. My belongings looked slightly off. My journal lay open on the table, pages covered in smudged handwriting, but the words didn't make sense. I squinted, trying to make out the faded lines. Leave before it's too late. The words were written in my own handwriting, but I had no memory of writing them. I closed the journal, my heart thumping. It was just stress, I told myself, just a trick of the mind. Later that day, I set out to hike around the park, exploring the historic sites. I visited old campgrounds, rutted trails from the Oregon Trail, and even a grave marker, feeling a strange sense of kinship with the travelers who had once passed through here. I wanted to document everything for my blog, to capture every detail of the landscape. But as the hours passed, I began to notice strange things. Items in my RV kept moving when I wasn't looking. My flashlight appeared on the table, though I swore I'd left it by the door. My camera had strange photos on it, images of a campfire that looked suspiciously like mine, even though I hadn't built one. And the most unsettling part, the clock on my phone didn't match the sun. Hours seemed to vanish in an instant, slipping through my fingers like sand. One moment, it was early afternoon. The next, twilight was settling over the hills. The sense of time slipping away terrified me, but I convinced myself it was all in my head. Isolation could mess with your perception. But as I returned to my RV that evening, I noticed something even stranger. A series of footprints, identical to my own, circling the campsite. My heart raced as I studied them. They were fresh, the ground disturbed, as if someone had been pacing around the RV. That night, I sat in the RV, trying to calm myself. I thumbed through my journal, finding notes I didn't remember writing. Each entry was cryptic, filled with half-formed thoughts and warnings. Don't touch the symbols again. It's waiting for you in the dark. Leave now. The entries were scrawled in my handwriting, but my mind drew blanks as I tried to remember writing them. Was I sleepwalking? Leaving messages for myself? Warning myself of something I couldn't remember? I fell asleep with my flashlight clutched tight, every creak of the RV making me jump. And then I dreamed. A vivid, horrible dream. I was wandering the plains, the land stretching endlessly around me, the sky dark and oppressive. Ahead of me, a figure moved through the mist. As I approached, I realized I was looking at myself. His face was blank, expressionless, his eyes empty. He drifted through the landscape like a ghost, oblivious to my presence. I woke up gasping, my skin clammy. It was just a dream, I told myself, but the dread lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed answers. I returned to the cave, my hands shaking as I traced the petroglyph again. The symbols seemed darker this time, almost alive, their edges pulsing faintly under my touch. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. Me. My mirror image standing just beyond the reach of the cave's light, watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. What do you want? I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He simply stared, his expression blank and empty, like he was waiting. I took a step back, my heart pounding. The mirror self took a step forward, mirroring my movement exactly. I reached for the petroglyph, feeling a jolt as my fingers grazed it. In an instant, memories flooded my mind. Fragmented moments of wandering through the plains, my face emotionless, like I was trapped in someone else's body. Flashes of pacing around the campsite, setting up a fire, taking pictures. Things I hadn't done, but somehow I had. The doppelganger watched, his eyes narrowing as I realized the truth. Every time I touched the petroglyph, I was losing pieces of myself, fragments of time slipping away, feeding into this mirror self who seemed to be slowly replacing me. "You belong here," he said, his voice hollow and echoing. "You've already left pieces of yourself behind. Ash Hollow is where you end." "No," I choked, backing away. I'm leaving, and you're not real." The doppelganger's face twisted, anger flashing in his eyes. "You can't leave. This is where you've always belonged. This is where you'll stay." Desperation surged through me, and I turned and ran, stumbling back down the path, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I reached the RV and fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I tried to start the engine. But when I turned the key, the RV sputtered and died. Every attempt to start it brought only silence, as if the vehicle itself were held in the grip of something ancient and unbreakable. "No," I whispered, slamming my fists against the wheel. "I'm not staying. I'm not." In a moment of defiance, I grabbed my journal and camera, ripping out the pages, erasing the photos. Every fragment of Ash Hollow I documented, I destroyed, severing any connection between myself and this cursed place. With each torn page, the air felt lighter, as though the hold on me was weakening. I felt my mind clearing, the fragments of lost time snapping back into place, grounding me in the present. I tried the engine one last time, and with a shudder, it roared to life. As I pulled away from the campsite, my gaze drifted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see my doppelganger watching from the trees. But the road was empty, the landscape eerily silent. Relief washed over me as I drove out of Ash Hollow, the plains stretching out behind me. But a faint unease remained, a reminder of the time I'd lost, the memories that felt like shadows. When I finally stopped to rest, I checked my phone, hoping to review my photos and notes. But every file from Ash Hollow was gone, erased as if it had never existed. As I sat there staring at the blank screen, I felt a chill. I glanced up at the mirror and, for a brief second, saw my own face staring back at me, expressionless, empty, just like in my dream. Then it was gone. I'm free, I told myself. I escaped. But deep down, a part of me wondered if I'd left something behind. If Ash Hollow still held a piece of me, a fragment lost in time, wandering endlessly in the plains, waiting for me to return. I'd come to the Black Hills National Forest looking for solitude, but the silence here felt different. The kind that crept in slowly, curling around you like a fog, making you feel watched. even in the emptiest places. It was exactly what I wanted, or what I thought I wanted. It was late evening by the time I arrived. The forest was vast, sprawling out in all directions. The trees clustered so close that they cast deep, dark shadows on the ground. My RV, a temporary home that I'd been using to escape everything, felt almost like a fortress against the wilderness. I set up camp quickly, hoping to get a few photos before dark. My heart raced with the thrill of being out here, away from the city, away from my past, away from people who were always watching me. Ever since my mental breakdown last year, the pressure to keep up my travel blog, to please my followers, had chipped away at me. The burnout had been bad enough that I'd deleted my social media, packed my things, and vanished onto the open road. I didn't expect to feel unsettled here, but the silence was thick and heavy, and as I looked out over the darkening forest, I felt an inexplicable chill. I was adjusting my camera, focusing on the long, twisting branches, when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A flash of color, familiar, too familiar. I spun around, expecting to see an animal or even another camper, but I saw nothing. Just trees and shadows. Shaking it off, I returned to my RV, locked the doors, and settled in for the night. I tried to read, but the silence pressed in from all sides, and my mind kept drifting to thoughts I'd been trying to avoid. Was I even me, without the validation of strangers online? Who was I, really, if I didn't exist in front of a camera? I'd come here to escape those questions, but the silence only made them louder. I eventually drifted off, wrapped in my blanket, letting the forest's deep quiet lull me to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sounds were faint but deliberate, circling my RV. I held my breath, listening. Nothing but the steady crunch of leaves, moving slowly, deliberately. I peered out the window, expecting an animal, maybe even another camper. But what I saw was me. My heart skipped. Standing in the shadows just at the edge of the clearing was a figure dressed exactly like me. Same jacket, same jeans. Her face was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel her gaze piercing through the glass, straight at me. She didn't move, just stood there, staring. I blinked, gripping the edge of my bed. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the light. I'd been alone for too long. This was just my mind turning shadows into something recognizable, something too familiar. But then she turned, her movement slow and smooth, and walked into the woods, vanishing into the darkness. I barely slept the rest of the night, jolting awake at every sound, waiting for her to return. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that the dark and the isolation were messing with me. But as I started my morning routine, I noticed something strange. My things weren't where I'd left them. My journal was sitting open on the table, pages marked with smudges of dirt, as if someone had flipped through it with muddy fingers. My blanket was rumpled, the pillows tossed to the floor. I felt a prickle of unease, but tried to ignore it. Maybe I'd just been careless the night before. After all, I was here to relax, to let go of the tension that had been building up inside me for months. But as I reached for my camera, I noticed the memory card was already inserted. I didn't remember taking photos last night, but I checked anyway, half expecting to see the usual landscape shots from the day. What I saw made my stomach drop. There, on the screen, was a photo of me sleeping, taken through the window of my RV. My face was peaceful, eyes closed, unaware. And in the corner of the frame, a shadowy figure loomed, barely visible, a glimpse of my own face twisted into an unreadable expression. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the camera. "No, no, no," I whispered, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't remember taking those photos. I couldn't have taken them. As I tried to catch my breath, I glanced at the window, and for a brief moment, I saw her, my own face staring back at me, mouth pulled into a thin, mocking smile. She vanished as quickly as she'd appeared, leaving me trembling, gripping the camera like it could protect me. I spent the day trying to shake the image from my mind. I told myself it had to be a mistake, that maybe I'd taken the photo by accident, that it was nothing more than a trick of the light. But as the sun began to set, a sense of dread crept over me. I didn't want to be here, not alone, not with her. As night fell, the footsteps returned, circling the RV, slow and deliberate. I pressed myself against the wall, feeling trapped, my breath shallow and panicked. "Go away," I whispered, clutching the blanket around me. "Please, just go away." Silence, and then a whisper, faint and distant. "Rachel." It was my own voice, calling from outside. I shivered, pressing my hands over my ears. This couldn't be happening. I was losing my mind. I forced myself to peek through the window, but this time, she was standing right at the glass, her face inches from mine, separated only by the thin pane. Her eyes met mine, her expression mirroring my own terror, my own confusion. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She tilted her head, her expression softening, almost sad. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice an echo of my own. I pulled back, shutting the blinds, my body shaking. I wanted to leave, but a strange compulsion kept me rooted in place, as though something were holding me here, urging me to stay. By morning, I was determined to find an explanation. I ventured outside, searching for footprints, for any sign that someone else had been here, but the ground was untouched. I was alone, and yet not. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I found myself drawn to the forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for me, somewhere in the shadows. I walked deeper into the woods, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. Then, in a small clearing, I saw her, my doppelganger, standing perfectly still, as if she'd been waiting all along. I froze, every instinct telling me to run, but her eyes held mine, calm, knowing, as though she understood every fear, every doubt I'd buried deep inside. "Who are you?" I whispered. She smiled faintly, her expression unreadable. "I'm you, Rachel, the part you left behind." I took a step back, my mind reeling. "This isn't real. You're not real." "Oh, but I am," she replied, her voice soft, almost gentle. "I'm the part of you that you've been hiding from, the part that questions, that doubts. You've spent so long running from yourself, and now you're finally here." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No, I didn't come here for this. I came here to get away, to be free." "You can't be free until you confront me," she said, stepping closer. "Until you confront yourself." My heart raced as her words sank in, a painful truth I didn't want to acknowledge. I'd been running, hiding from my own fears, my own insecurities, hoping that distance and solitude would erase them. But they'd followed me, manifesting in the one person I couldn't escape. "I'm tired of running," I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't want to be afraid of myself anymore." She smiled, and for the first time her expression was gentle, understanding. "Then stop hiding. Face what you've been avoiding." I took a deep breath, the weight of my fear beginning to lift. I met her gaze, finally accepting the reflection of myself standing before me. She nodded, slowly fading into the shadows, her form blending with the trees, leaving me alone in the clearing. For the first time in months, I felt whole. As I made my way back to the RV, the forest felt lighter, the silence less oppressive. I'd confronted the darkness within myself, the fears that had haunted me, and for once, I didn't feel alone. When I drove away the next morning, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her watching me from the trees. But all I saw was my own reflection, calm, content, and finally at peace with the person staring back. I didn't believe in curses. I didn't believe in ghosts or haunted places either, but that was before I spent a night at Shadow Lake. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, just me and my RV parked at the edge of the lake, surrounded by trees and silence. I'd been on the road for a few weeks now, looking for something to spark my creativity. My photography had been suffering, and I thought a little time in nature, away from the noise of the world, might bring my focus back. The lake itself was beautiful, a dark, glassy expanse framed by dense pine trees. The water was so still it looked like a mirror, reflecting the overcast sky and distant treetops. But something about that stillness felt unnatural, almost watchful. When I'd stopped at a nearby gas station to ask for directions, the clerk, an older man with grizzled hair and a look in his eye like he'd seen things he couldn't unsee, had given me a strange warning. "You camping at Shadow Lake?" he asked, his voice low. When I nodded, he shook his head. "Lake's got a way of looking back at you," he said. "Some folks go there, don't come back. If I were you, I'd stay away from the water after dark." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me as I drove down the winding dirt path, my tires crunching over gravel until I reached the lakeside. Shadow Lake looked quiet, serene even, but I couldn't shake the man's warning. By the time I'd set up camp, dusk was settling over the lake, casting long shadows over the water. The air was thick and heavy, the silence absolute. Not a single bird called out. No crickets chirped. It felt as though the whole place were holding its breath. I stood by the edge of the lake, camera in hand, watching as the last light faded and shadows crept across the water. My reflection was dark and hazy on the surface, blending with the mist rolling in from the far side of the lake. But then I noticed something odd, a shape in the water just behind me. It was faint, barely there, but it looked like a second figure, tall and shadowy, standing a few feet behind me. I turned, heart pounding, but of course no one was there. When I looked back at the lake, the shape was gone, leaving only the smooth surface and my own pale reflection. I laughed nervously, chalking it up to the eerie atmosphere and my own overactive imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As night fell, the silence grew heavier, oppressive. I sat by my small fire, trying to read, but my mind kept drifting to the lake. Every so often, I'd glance up, half expecting to see something moving in the darkness. But the lake was still, dark, and calm as glass. Around midnight, just as I was drifting off in my camp chair, a soft sound pulled me back to consciousness. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. The sound of a splash, like something moving in the water. I peered toward the lake, but the firelight didn't reach far enough to show anything beyond the first few feet of shore. The rest was swallowed by shadows. I waited, listening, my breath catching as another faint splash echoed across the water. And then, to my horror, I saw it. Lights. Tiny, flickering orbs just above the surface of the water. At first, I thought they were fireflies, but they were too steady, too synchronized. They hovered in a line, drifting closer to shore, flickering in and out of existence like candles in the wind. And then they stopped, forming a perfect ring in the middle of the lake. I felt an eerie pull, a strange urge to go closer, to wade into the water and reach out to those lights. But the clerk's warning echoed in my mind. Stay away from the water after dark. Shaking off the strange compulsion, I backed away, retreating into the RV and locking the door behind me. But even from inside, I could still feel the pull of the lake, as if it were calling to me, waiting. The next morning, I told myself it had all been a dream, a product of too many late nights and too much time alone. But when I stepped out of the RV and walked back to the water's edge, I found something that made my skin crawl. A small, leather-bound notebook, half buried in the mud. I picked it up, brushing off the dirt. It was old, the leather worn and cracked, but somehow dry, as if it had just been placed there. When I opened it, I found pages filled with messy, frantic handwriting, describing experiences eerily similar to mine. Lights on the lake, strange sounds, a feeling of being watched. The last entry made my blood run cold. The lake knows. Don't look too long. I snapped the notebook shut, heart racing. Was this a prank? Had someone else camped here and seen the same things I had? My eyes drifted to the lake, and in the sunlight, it looked almost ordinary. Almost. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that it was watching me, waiting. That night, the lights returned, flickering on the water like ghostly candles. I sat in my RV, clutching the notebook, trying to ignore the strange whispers drifting through the darkness. They were faint at first, barely more than a breeze, but as the night wore on, they grew louder, forming words, voices that sounded almost human. And then I heard my name. Come closer! My skin prickled with fear, every instinct screaming at me to stay inside. But the pull was stronger than my fear. It was like the lake had reached into my mind, wrapping invisible threads around me, urging me to come to it. Almost in a trance, I found myself stepping out of the RV, walking toward the lake, the voices growing clearer with each step. When I reached the shore, I saw my reflection in the water, but it wasn't my face. The figure staring back at me looked like me, but something was wrong. Its eyes were empty, hollow, and its mouth was twisted into a faint, mocking smile. My breath caught as the figure raised its hand, beckoning me closer, its expression shifting into something dark, almost hungry. Join us. A wave of terror jolted me back to my senses, and I stumbled away from the lake, heart pounding. I locked myself in the RV, but the whispers continued, growing louder until it felt like they were right outside, calling my name. The next morning, exhausted and terrified, I decided to leave. But as I started up the RV, I realized with horror that the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but it was dead. Panicking, I checked my phone, but the signal was gone. I was completely cut off. That night, I sat by the fire, clutching the notebook, my eyes fixed on the lake. The fog rolled in thicker than before, wrapping around the trees, casting everything in an eerie gray glow. And then, once again, the lights appeared, closer this time, hovering just above the water's edge. This time, I didn't move. I didn't even blink, terrified that if I looked away, they'd get closer. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the lake, pale and translucent, its form shifting and flickering like a candle in the wind. It looked human, but its features were blurred, distorted, like a photograph smudged with ink. The figure moved closer, its hollow eyes fixed on me, and as it reached the shore, I realized with horror that it looked like me. It was me, twisted and dark, a reflection of everything I feared. "Come to the water," it whispered, its voice soft and cold like the wind over a grave. "Join us." I took a step back, but the figure followed, its pale hand reaching out, fingers curling around empty air. In a burst of desperation, I threw the notebook into the lake, and the figure paused, its eyes flickering with something like anger. The lights dimmed and the whispers faded, the figure slowly sinking back into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. I didn't sleep that night. I waited, trembling as the hours passed, watching the lake in case the figure returned. But as dawn broke, the fog lifted and the lake returned to its eerie, silent calm. The RV's engine started on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove away, leaving Shadow Lake behind, the memories of those strange nights already fading, like a bad dream slipping from my mind. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, faint and distant, like an echo from another world. And in every dark mirror, in every still pond, I catch a glimpse of something watching, waiting. Because Shadow Lake never really lets you go. And part of me wonders if someday it will call me back. The gravel road twisted and wound its way through the dense forest as I neared Devil's Hollow. I'd heard whispers about the place, legends of strange fires that burned without fuel, of people who vanished without a trace. The stories intrigued me, even though they were clearly just tales. I was a geologist, after all, not a thrill seeker, and I had a fascination with unusual natural phenomena. This place had one of the oddest, a mysterious heat source that rose from the ground, even during cool nights. That was enough to get me here. As I pulled my RV into a narrow clearing, I noted the silence that wrapped around the hollow. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. No bird song, no rustle of leaves in the wind. Just a thick, heavy quiet that made me feel like I was intruding. Shrugging off a twinge of unease, I set up camp, determined to ignore the old stories and focus on the geological phenomena I was here to explore. But the longer I stayed, the stranger things felt. From the moment I stepped out, it was as if I'd been transported to another world. After setting up my tent and fire pit, I wandered along a narrow trail, hoping to find signs of volcanic rock or heat vents. I didn't find any, but I did come across something strange. An old fire pit, blackened with soot and surrounded by stones marked with faint, almost ancient symbols. My fingers brushed the stones, noting how warm they were, almost too hot to touch. The forest floor was cold and damp, yet these rocks radiated a heat that felt like it had been building for decades. The unsettling thing was that it looked like it had been used recently. As I examined the stones, I found a melted compass half buried in the ashes, its needle warped beyond recognition. The metal was hot to the touch. My breath caught as a sharp, acrid smell reached me, like burning wood mixed with something metallic. A prickle of fear ran down my spine. I forced myself to ignore it. there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was volcanic activity or some chemical reaction in the soil. That was why I'd come after all. Then I heard a faint crackling sound like distant flames. I spun around, scanning the trees, but there was nothing. Just the quiet, empty forest. My heart pounded as I returned to camp, telling myself it was just nerves. Still, as dusk settled over Devil's Hollow, that sound haunted me, slipping into my mind like a whisper. As night fell, the temperature dropped, yet the ground beneath my feet grew warmer, a strange sensation that made me uncomfortable. I sat by my campfire, staring into the flames, trying to enjoy the solitude, but something felt off. The firelight flickered against the trees, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and swayed as if they were alive. Then I noticed the other fire pits. In the distance, faintly visible through the trees, I saw glows of light, small, scattered fires that burned low to the ground. I squinted, thinking they were reflections, maybe other campers, but each fire seemed identical to mine, placed in a near-perfect circle around me. It was like a ghostly ring of flames, watching, waiting. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked toward one of the lights, hoping to find some explanation. But as I neared the fire pit, the flames vanished, leaving only a circle of warm, blackened stones, almost identical to the one I'd found earlier. And there, lying among the ashes, was a rusted, half-melted key. I hesitated, but something in me pushed forward. I reached down, lifting the key, feeling its unexpected warmth. It felt like a relic, something lost to time, yet somehow alive. A sudden voice broke the silence. It was a faint whisper, barely audible but clear. "Leave, before it's too late." I spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but I was alone. My hand tightened around the key as I stumbled back to my campsite, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But my curiosity was stronger than my fear, and I convinced myself it was just an echo, a trick of the hollow. As I lay in my RV that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the crackling of flames and felt that oppressive heat, like the hollow itself was alive, breathing, waiting. The next day, I explored the hollow again, hoping to find some logical explanation for the strange fires. But what I found only deepened the mystery. There were more fire pits scattered around the forest, each one surrounded by charred stones marked with strange symbols. Some were smaller, almost like children's campsites, while others looked large enough to accommodate whole groups. And at each site, I found remnants of past visitors, melted compasses, rusted knives, scorched pieces of fabric. It was as though every camper who had come here had left a piece of themselves behind. My stomach twisted as I read fragments of notes I found in an old, crumbling journal left by one of the pits. The fire watches. It knows you. It wants you to stay. A shiver ran down my spine. Suddenly, it felt like the hollow was closing in around me, as though the trees themselves were leaning closer, watching. And then, as if responding to my thoughts, I felt it. The ground beneath me began to tremble, faintly at first, then with a steady, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. The earth grew warmer, almost hot, and I stumbled back, feeling the heat seep through my boots. When I looked up, I saw figures moving through the trees. They were faint, ghostly, their faces twisted with fear and desperation, each one flickering like a dying flame. I watched in horror as they moved toward me, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. I bolted back to the RV, but no matter where I looked, I saw them, spectral figures, trapped in an endless loop, reliving their last moments in Devil's Hollow. That night, the fire pits around me began to glow brighter, the flames rising higher, like a ring of torches enclosing my campsite. The heat was unbearable, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Desperate, I tried to leave, but every path led me back to the same spot, back to the fire pit I'd found on my first day. I felt like I was caught in a nightmare, trapped in an endless loop. The ground beneath me burned, and the crackling of flames grew louder, as if the hollow itself were alive. Then I saw it. The main fire pit, the one I'd been avoiding, its embers glowing fiercely, casting strange, flickering shadows that danced and twisted like the spirits I'd seen. I realized then that the fire was the source, the heart of the hollow, the force that trapped all who came here. The whispers returned, louder now, pleading, desperate. Extinguish the fire. End the cycle. The spirits surrounded me, their faces twisted with desperation, each one reaching out, their hands flickering like flames. They urged me forward, pushing me toward the fire pit as though their very souls depended on it. I grabbed the old key from my pocket, gripping it tightly, feeling the heat pulsing from it. Without thinking, I threw it into the fire pit, hoping it would break whatever curse bound them. The flames sputtered, flickering wildly, and for a moment, the heat intensified, burning my skin. I stumbled back, covering my face as the fire roared, almost as if it were fighting me. Then, slowly, the flames began to die, sinking into the ashes, the light fading. As the fire went out, the spirits around me sighed, their forms dissolving into mist, their faces peaceful for the first time. The oppressive weight lifted, the air cooled, and the hollow felt empty. I watched as the last embers faded, leaving only darkness and silence. Dawn broke over Devil's Hollow as I packed up my things, my body aching, my mind numb. The hollow felt different now, lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted. But as I prepared to leave, I found one last item sitting by the RV door. A small, blackened piece of metal, twisted and warped. The old key. I hesitated, staring at it, my mind racing. The key was cool to the touch now, harmless, but I felt a chill run down my spine. Part of me wondered if the hollow had really let me go, or if it was simply waiting, ready to start the cycle again. As I drove away, I glanced back at the forest, watching as the trees faded into the distance. I told myself it was over, that I'd broken the curse. But in the back of my mind, I knew that Devil's Hollow had left its mark on me. And somehow, deep down, I could still feel the heat of that fire waiting just beneath the surface. There's something about stillwood pines that's always unsettled me, even though I don't scare easy. Maybe it's the trees, dark and impossibly tall, their branches blocking out so much sunlight it feels like dusk all day. Or maybe it's the silence, the kind that presses on you like the whole forest is watching, waiting for something. Still, here I was. I'd heard stories about a lost cabin that only appeared at night, something out of a ghost story, but I thought it was just a tale locals passed around to keep people from wandering too far. I'm a skeptic by nature, and this place was supposed to be a quiet escape, a few nights alone with nothing but my RV and a camera. Just me, the trees, and the silence. But things didn't feel right from the start. On my first day, I arrived around noon, pulling the RV into a small clearing close to the trailhead. The air was still thick and cold for mid-autumn, with mist clinging to the ground. As I set up, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned, expecting a fellow camper or a hiker, but saw only trees. Just the faint crunch of leaves drifting away. "Hello?" I called out, the sound barely carrying in the dense, damp air. Nothing. Trying to shake the feeling, I walked down to the small creek nearby. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of leaves, their colors muted under the overcast sky. Just as I reached the water, my eye caught on something strange. A small, old-fashioned key lying in the mud. It was tarnished but intact with an intricate, almost antique design. A thrill ran down my spine as I picked it up. What were the odds of finding something like this here, lying in the open, as if it had been left for me to find? I tucked the key into my pocket and told myself it was just an odd coincidence. Later that night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the woods were watching me. The crackling flames threw long shadows against the trees, making them look like skeletal hands reaching out. My skin prickled with that strange awareness again, like I wasn't alone. I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. And then came the footsteps. At first, they were faint, just a soft crunch of leaves. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, more defined, like someone was walking toward me. My heart hammered as I shone my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Just the empty, impenetrable darkness. I laughed to myself, forcing out a breath. I was letting the isolation get to me. But as I turned back to the fire, I caught a glimpse of something. A faint glow, just a little ways off, deeper into the woods. It was a soft orange light, like an old lantern, flickering through the trees. I squinted, thinking it must be another camper, maybe someone out for a late-night walk. But as I watched, the light grew brighter, flickering unsteadily, beckoning. I don't know why, but I stood up and began to follow it, leaving the safety of the fire and stepping into the dense trees. The light danced ahead, always just out of reach, leading me further from the campsite. Every time I got closer, it seemed to move, slipping deeper into the forest. Finally, as I pushed through a thicket, I saw it. The cabin. It stood there, old and decayed, half hidden in the shadows, like it had been waiting for me. The walls were warped and peeling, the windows broken, and an old oil lantern hung by the door, casting that strange, inviting glow. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there. But curiosity got the better of me. Slowly, I approached the cabin, my hand brushing against the key in my pocket. I glanced at the door and noticed a small keyhole, worn with age, as though someone had locked it long ago. Heart pounding, I slipped the key into the lock, and with a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, it felt like stepping back in time. Dust coated every surface, the air thick and stale, but everything looked untouched, frozen as it had been decades ago. An old rocking chair creaked gently near the fireplace, and a faded rug lay across the floor, patterned with the kind of designs you'd find in antique stores. I wandered through the small living room, noticing strange, worn objects. A broken compass lay on the mantel. A dusty doll sat in a chair, its porcelain face cracked, and there were sketches scattered on a table, each one of a family, a mother, father, and a young child. The faces were drawn with haunting detail, their eyes wide and frightened. My skin crawled as I moved to a shelf lined with journals, their leather bindings cracked and discolored. I picked one up, flipping through its pages, my fingers trembling. The entries were scattered, the handwriting shaky and desperate. The forest watches us. I see shadows in the trees. Something is out there. The final entry made my blood run cold. They're always watching. We'll never be alone here. I dropped the journal, the words ringing in my head. This place wasn't just abandoned. It felt haunted, filled with the echoes of people who had vanished long ago, leaving only their fear behind. Then I heard it, a faint whisper drifting through the cabin. My heart raced as I spun around, searching for the source but saw no one. "Leave before it's too late." The voice was soft, almost pleading, and it sounded like a child. A shiver ran down my spine, and I backed toward the door, my every instinct screaming at me to get out. But the door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, my hands slick with sweat, but it was locked tight. Panic clawed at my throat as the whispers grew louder, filling the room, overlapping until they were a cacophony of pleading, desperate voices. "Get out! Don't stay!" I stumbled back, crashing into the table, my pulse hammering as shadows seemed to gather around me, closing in. Through the broken windows, I saw figures moving through the trees, ghostly, translucent shapes, their faces twisted with terror as they moved closer, surrounding the cabin. The voices grew louder, filling my head, and then, in the window, I saw the family from the sketches, the mother, father, and child, their faces hollow and lifeless, staring at me with empty eyes. "Please, break the curse." Their voices filled my head, and in that moment, I knew they were trapped, bound to this cabin, doomed to replay their final moments over and over. My hand found the broken compass on the table, and as I lifted it, the whispers grew fainter, as if the spirits were watching, waiting. I didn't know why, but I had the sudden urge to destroy it, to break the one thing that seemed to hold the cabin's twisted memories together. With trembling hands, I threw the compass to the floor, smashing it beneath my boot. The voices stopped, and the figures outside the windows faded, dissolving into the fog. The oppressive weight lifted, and the door creaked open as if releasing me. I stumbled out of the cabin, the cold night air filling my lungs as I fled, running through the forest, not daring to look back. I reached the campsite just as dawn broke, the first light of morning casting a soft glow over the trees. I collapsed by the RV, my mind reeling, every inch of me shaken and exhausted. As the fog lifted, the forest felt almost normal again, the shadows receding, the silence no longer oppressive. I got into the RV, my hands shaking as I turned the key and drove away, leaving Stillwood Pines and the nightmare of that cabin behind. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, something caught my eye. Sitting on the passenger seat was the small, old key, the one I thought I'd left behind. I drove faster, heart pounding, trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to echo faintly in the back of my mind, a lingering reminder of the horrors I'd encountered. Because some places don't let you go so easily, and I knew, deep down, that the cabin was still there, waiting for someone else to find it. Camping in the redwoods had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. Life had been too loud lately, too busy, and the idea of spending a few days among towering trees and quiet trails felt like a relief. I'd driven my RV out to a remote spot in hidden redwood grove, far from any marked trails or well-traveled paths. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The first day was bliss. I spent hours wandering among trees so tall I felt like a speck. Their trunks stretched towards the sky, ancient and silent. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. By sunset, I'd made my way back to the RV, exhausted but content, eager for the solitude of a night in the heart of the forest. But as darkness settled, strange sounds began to echo through the woods. At first, it was just a distant, rhythmic thudding, like footsteps from somewhere deep in the forest. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just animals foraging, but it grew louder, almost purposeful. Lying in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was overreacting to the isolation. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I woke early, eager to shake off the nerves from the night before. After a quick breakfast, I set out to explore a new trail I'd spotted the day before. The early light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. But something felt off. As I walked, I kept noticing things that seemed strangely familiar. A cluster of mushrooms I'd definitely seen yesterday, a large boulder shaped like an arrowhead. At first, I brushed it off as déjà vu, until I reached a clearing where I could swear I'd already been. My heart quickened as I checked my GPS, but it was dead, despite being fully charged the night before. I decided to head back to the RV, hoping a break would clear my mind, but every turn I made felt like I'd taken it before. Each path seemed to circle back, leading me to the same clearing, the same trees, the same boulder. By the time I finally stumbled back to camp, the sun was dipping low on the horizon. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I'd just lost track of time. But as night fell, the forest grew darker and quieter, and once again, the strange thudding began. This time, it was closer. My skin prickled as I lay in bed, listening to the rhythmic sound echoing through the trees, feeling like I was being stalked by something just out of sight. Sleep didn't come easily, and when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of shadowy figures weaving between the trees, watching me with hollow eyes. I awoke to the same morning light, the same sounds of birds chirping, and, inexplicably, the same sense of déjà vu. Every detail felt familiar, from the way the sunlight streamed through the trees to the smell of damp moss in the air. As I brewed coffee, a gnawing feeling gripped me. It felt like yesterday, exactly like yesterday. Trying to shake it off, I set out for another hike, but it didn't take long before I realized something was terribly wrong. Everything was repeating. The same boulder, the same trees, the same silent, watchful atmosphere. I returned to the RV, hoping that leaving the forest might clear my mind. I started the engine and drove toward the main road, but after a few miles my heart sank. I was back where I'd started. I circled the grove 3 times, each route leading me right back to the spot where I'd parked. As night fell for the second time, I felt the first pangs of fear tighten in my chest. The strange thudding returned, louder now, more insistent, as if it were calling to me, demanding my attention. I sat up, gripping my flashlight, my pulse racing as I scanned the shadows outside. That's when I saw it. A figure, just at the edge of the trees. It was tall and dark, its outline barely discernible against the forest. I couldn't make out any details, just the vague impression of a shape watching me. My breath hitched. I blinked, and it was gone. When I woke up the next morning, I knew something was terribly wrong. It was the same day again. The same sunrise, the same air, the same oppressive feeling of deja vu pressing down on me. I couldn't deny it any longer. I was trapped, reliving the same day in some kind of twisted loop. Desperation clawed at me. I tried changing everything I could think of, walking in a different direction, marking the trees, even shouting at the top of my lungs, hoping someone would hear me. But every path I took led me back to the same places, the same landmarks, like the forest was alive, rearranging itself to keep me here. By afternoon, panic set in. I tried to leave the RV again, driving as fast as I dared down the dirt path, but no matter where I turned, I ended up right back where I'd started. The forest had become a maze, twisting and shifting around me, trapping me in its grip. That night, as darkness fell, the thudding returned, louder than ever. My pulse raced as I sat in the RV, clutching my flashlight, waiting for the figure to appear again. This time, I saw it up close, standing just beyond the firelight. A tall, shadowy figure, watching me with eyes that seemed to absorb the light, turning it into darkness. I felt its gaze piercing through me, its presence filling the air with a heavy, oppressive energy. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen, held in place by a force I couldn't see. And then, in a voice that was low and hollow, it spoke. "You are not welcome here." Its words sent a chill down my spine, a wave of dread crashing over me. I tried to respond, to plead, but my voice wouldn't come. The figure seemed to grow taller, its form blending into the trees, becoming part of the forest itself. "You will stay until you understand." I didn't understand what it meant. What did it want me to know? My mind raced, searching for any answer, but the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. The next day began like the ones before. The same eerie, unchanging dawn, the same trails that led nowhere. My mind was fraying, unraveling with each repetition. I couldn't remember how many times I'd woken to the same day, how many times I'd walked the same trails, seen the same shadow watching from the edge of the trees. The days blended together, an endless cycle of fear and confusion, each one tightening the forest's grip on me. I tried everything to break free, leaving food offerings, carving desperate messages into trees, shouting into the emptiness, begging for release. But the forest was silent, indifferent, watching me struggle. And every night, as darkness fell, the thudding returned, closer and closer, a reminder that I was being hunted by something beyond my understanding. On the final loop, if it even was the final one, I sat in the RV, broken, my mind barely holding on. I tried everything, every escape, every plea, but nothing had worked. The words of the shadow echoed in my mind. "You will stay until you understand." What did it want from me? In that moment, I realized that I'd spent every loop trying to escape, trying to avoid the fear, the unknown, but I had never stopped to confront it, to face whatever had trapped me here. Taking a shaky breath, I stepped outside, flashlight in hand. The forest was silent, watching. I walked towards the spot where I'd first seen the figure, my heart pounding with each step. I reached the edge of the trees where the shadows were thick and impenetrable, and I waited. Slowly, the figure emerged from the darkness, towering and still, its eyes like empty voids fixed on me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I held my ground, meeting its gaze. I don't understand," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The figure tilted its head, the shadows around it thickening, pressing in on me until I could barely breathe. "You have disturbed the forest, but you have not listened." The words resonated in the silence, filling my mind with images, flashes of forgotten memories, moments I'd tried to bury. I saw myself rushing through life, ignoring the beauty around me, taking everything for granted. The forest, this place, had become just another backdrop for my own needs. The figure's voice filled the air again, low and final. "Respect or remain." I nodded, a deep sorrow filling me as I understood. I'd come here seeking peace, but I'd never respected the forest, never truly listened to the silence, the life that pulsed through every tree and shadow. As I lowered my head, a sense of calm washed over me. The figure began to fade, its form dissolving into the night, and the forest seemed to exhale, releasing me. The next morning, I woke to a different day, a new dawn breaking over the trees, sunlight streaming through the branches, fresh and alive. The weight in the air had lifted, and the shadow was gone. I packed my things and left, but as I drove away, a faint whisper lingered in my mind, a reminder of the lesson the forest had taught me. Respect the woods, or they will remember. We arrived at Whisper Lake just before dusk. Alice was sitting next to me, staring out the window, her face pale and drawn. The lake spread out in front of us, calm and glassy, the surface perfectly still, as if it were holding its breath. I'd thought a camping trip might help us reconnect, give us a way to escape from everything. But the moment we arrived, I felt the air shift. There was a silence here, something thick and unnerving. "Alice," I said, reaching for her hand. She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the water. After a moment, she pulled her hand away and stepped out of the RV. We'd spent the past year in a kind of forced numbness, a year of trying to pretend we weren't haunted by what had happened, by Tyler's disappearance. Alice's younger brother had been just 23, bright and full of life when he'd vanished during a hiking trip. The guilt had swallowed us whole, and every attempt to move past it had only made it worse. I stepped out, inhaling the sharp, damp air. The forest surrounded us, the trees looming like sentinels, and the lake itself stretched endlessly, silent and foreboding. "It's so quiet," Alice murmured, her gaze distant, "like it's waiting for something." I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "We're in the middle of nowhere. This is the peace and quiet we came for." But even as I said it, I felt a prickle of unease. We set up camp, working mostly in silence. I forced a few casual remarks, trying to lighten the mood, but Alice's responses were clipped, her eyes drifting back to the lake every few minutes. That night, after we'd eaten, we sat side by side staring at the dark expanse of water. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the surface, almost too perfect. I was just beginning to relax when Alice sat up abruptly, her body tense. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I strained to listen, nothing but silence. "No," I replied, frowning. "What did you hear?" She turned toward me, her eyes wide, her face ashen. I thought I heard someone calling my name from the lake." A shiver crawled up my spine, but I forced a laugh. "It's late, Alice. Probably just the wind." She nodded slowly, though I could see she wasn't convinced. We went inside the RV, but the night was restless. I kept waking up, haunted by strange dreams. In one, I was standing at the lake's edge, watching a figure drift out onto the water. A young man, his face pale and expressionless. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear his words. When I finally woke in a sweat, I found Alice already awake, staring at the ceiling. "You were mumbling in your sleep," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Sorry," I said, reaching for her hand. "Just a bad dream." But I could tell she was already drifting away, her thoughts miles from here. Maybe even back to that day when Tyler had vanished. We never talked about it, not really. I'd thought that silence would make it easier, but now I was beginning to wonder if it had only made it worse. The next morning, we decided to hike around the lake. The mist had thickened overnight, and the fog hung low over the water, obscuring the far shore. As we walked, the silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. Alice was ahead of me, her steps slow, as if she were walking in a trance. I tried to make conversation, but she barely responded, her eyes fixed on the lake. And then she stopped. "Ben," she whispered, pointing to something on the shore. I squinted, following her gaze, and saw it, a shoe half buried in the mud, worn and covered in grime, but unmistakable. My heart pounded. It was the same brand and style that Tyler had worn the day he disappeared. It can't be," I stammered, reaching for her. But Alice pulled away, walking toward it, her face pale. "It's his," she said softly, picking it up with trembling hands. "It's Tyler's." I wanted to argue, to tell her it was impossible, that it had to be someone else's. But I knew it was useless. She'd already convinced herself. "We need to leave, Alice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now. This place. It's not right." But she shook her head, clutching the shoe as if it were a lifeline. "No, Ben. I think he's here. I think he's calling to me." That night, the fog grew thicker, curling around the RV like fingers. I lay beside Alice, but she was rigid, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling. The silence outside felt oppressive, almost alive, pressing against the windows, seeping through the walls. Then I heard it, a soft, insistent whisper, my name repeated over and over. "Ben." I sat up, heart pounding, and looked toward the lake. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the mist until they filled the entire RV. "Alice, do you hear that?" I whispered. She didn't respond, her face blank, her eyes distant. "Tyler," she whispered back, her voice hollow. "He's calling for me." Before I could stop her, she slipped out of bed and stumbled to the door, her movements mechanical, as though she were sleepwalking. "Alice!" I hissed, grabbing her arm. "Stop!" But she shook me off, her gaze fixed on the lake. "I need to go to him. He's waiting for me." I stood frozen as she moved outside, drawn toward the water. I wanted to follow, to pull her back, but fear rooted me in place. In the distance, just beyond the edge of the shore, I saw a figure standing in the mist. A young man, his face shrouded in shadow. It was Tyler. Or at least, it looked like him. "Alice, no!" I shouted, finally breaking free of my paralysis and running after her. I grabbed her shoulders, turning her to face me. "Tyler's gone," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever that is, it's not him." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to her. But then, her gaze drifted past me, fixing on the figure by the lake. "He's here," she whispered. I know he's here. I can feel it." The figure in the mist beckoned, its movements slow and deliberate. Alice began to step forward again, and I realized with a cold shock that if I didn't do something, I might lose her too. "Tyler's gone because of me," I blurted out, my voice breaking. "I didn't take your warning seriously that day. I ignored you when you said something felt wrong." Alice stopped, her face turning to me, shock replacing the trance-like blankness. "I've been blaming myself ever since," I continued, barely able to keep my voice steady. "But you have to believe me. This thing, it's not Tyler. It's something else. Something that wants us to keep feeling guilty, that wants us trapped here." Her expression shifted, a flicker of understanding breaking through her grief. She looked back at the figure, and for a moment, her face softened, like she was truly seeing it for the first time. "Ben," she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure wavered, its form distorting, its face twisting into something darker, angrier. The soft, pleading expression turned to a scowl, its eyes narrowing. "You don't belong here," I said, stepping forward, my voice firm. "We're not your prisoners." The figure let out a low, guttural hiss, its form flickering like a shadow in the mist. And then, slowly, it began to fade, melting back into the fog, its eyes the last thing to disappear. Alice stood frozen beside me, her breathing ragged. I put an arm around her, and she leaned into me, her body trembling. "I thought I'd lost him all over again," she whispered. "I know," I said, holding her tight, "but we have to let him go. We have to let all of it go." As dawn broke, the fog began to lift, revealing the lake's surface, now calm and still. We packed up the RV in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. I could feel the weight that had settled over us finally starting to lift, replaced by a strange, quiet relief. As we pulled away from Whisper Lake, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching us from the shore. But the lake was empty, the shoreline clear. And for the first time since Tyler had disappeared, I felt like we'd finally started to move forward, away from the grief, the guilt, and the ghosts that had haunted us. Whisper Lake faded into the distance behind us, its surface shimmering beneath the morning sun. The weight that had followed us was gone, replaced by a fragile sense of peace, a peace I hoped would last. I should have known better than to wander too far. Hidden Valley was supposed to be a quiet retreat, a break from the noise of life. I'd parked my RV on the edge of a secluded trail, eager to spend a weekend alone. The jagged rock formations and silence were a welcome escape, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling as I set up camp, the kind of unease that hovers at the edge of your mind, as if you're being watched. The first day was easy. I hiked up rocky hills and through narrow canyons, marveling at the strange rock formations that twisted toward the sky like claws. Locals had warned me about getting lost, but I'd rolled my eyes. I was a seasoned camper, after all, and the twists of the canyons only made the adventure more interesting. But on the second day, things began to shift. Late in the afternoon, while exploring an unmarked trail, I noticed a gap between two massive rock faces, almost hidden by the shadows. It didn't look like part of any natural formation. I stepped closer, squinting into the dimness. There, carved into the stone, was an ancient-looking entrance, framed by faint markings I couldn't recognize. The stone walls seemed to pulse, the air thick and stale. Something deep inside told me to turn back, but my curiosity won out. I stepped inside. The air changed immediately. It was cooler, heavier, almost damp despite the dry desert outside. My footsteps echoed as I walked, and the walls seemed to close in on me, like a tunnel that went on forever. At first, it felt like just another canyon, but soon I noticed the paths weren't leading where they should. Every turn took me in circles, and each exit led me back to a place I'd already been. The carvings on the walls grew stranger, more intricate, and I could have sworn some of the symbols looked familiar, as if I'd seen them in a dream. I tried marking my path with small stones, but each time I came back around, the stones were gone. It was as if something was rearranging the labyrinth just to keep me trapped. An uneasy feeling crept over me. It wasn't just the disorientation. The silence was too complete, the air too still. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I was being watched. The first hour was tense but manageable. I told myself it was all just a trick of the mind, that I'd find my way out eventually. But as I continued, strange things began to happen. I heard whispers, not actual voices, but faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to drift from the walls. Sometimes I thought I caught words, but they slipped away before I could grasp them. Then there were the shadows. I noticed them as I turned a corner, just out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just my own shadow, but it didn't move the way it should. It lingered, delayed, like it was trying to catch up to me. I stopped, turning slowly, and saw nothing. Just an empty pathway stretching into the darkness. But as I moved, the shadow followed, matching my every step, shifting and stretching unnaturally, as if it had a mind of its own. I turned away, forcing myself to keep going, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was watching me. I don't know how long I wandered, but time began to slip. It felt like hours, but there was no sky to mark the passage of the sun, only the dim, stale light filtering in from somewhere above. My phone had no signal, and the battery was draining fast. Panic gnawed at me as I pressed on, each turn leading nowhere, each dead end mocking my attempts to escape. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. I rounded a corner, and there in the dim light was myself, or at least my reflection. It was like a mirage on the rock wall, a perfect image of me, staring back with wide eyes. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, watching the reflection. But something was wrong. It wasn't copying me exactly. It moved a fraction too slow, like it was lagging behind, studying me. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection's mouth opened in sync with mine, but no sound came out. Instead, its eyes shifted, darkening, growing hollow. A distorted smile crept across its face, twisted in a way that felt wrong, too wide, too knowing. I stumbled back, tearing my eyes away, my heart hammering in my chest. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. Just an empty wall. The shadows grew darker, thicker, as if they were pressing in on me. Every path twisted back into itself, and each turn led to more dead ends. I was trapped, and the labyrinth seemed to know it. The whispers grew louder, filling the space around me, the words twisting and overlapping until I could barely think. I caught fragments, words like stay and forever, and a name I hadn't heard in years. The name of someone I'd lost, someone I'd tried to forget. Memories flashed through my mind, scenes from my past that felt almost tangible, as if the labyrinth was pulling my thoughts from my mind, displaying them like trophies. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. But the labyrinth didn't stop. Instead, the shadows seemed to deepen, taking on a new shape. I saw faces in the darkness, faces of people I'd known, distorted, twisted, their eyes empty and hollow, staring at me with that same knowing look. And at the center of it all was a shadowy figure, its form vague and shifting, like it was made of smoke. It spoke, its voice a low, guttural whisper that echoed through the labyrinth, filling every corner. "You are lost, like all the others." I backed away, my heart pounding. "No, I'm not lost. I'm getting out of here." The figure laughed, a sound that grated against my mind. "The labyrinth keeps what it takes. Your fear feeds it. Your regrets bind you." The shadows began to close in, the walls seeming to shift and tighten, as if the labyrinth itself was alive, trapping me in its embrace. I don't remember how long I ran. Every turn looked the same, every path led back to the shadowed figure. I was exhausted, my legs burning, my mind fraying at the edges. I could feel the labyrinth burrowing into my mind, twisting my memories, showing me moments I'd tried to bury, regrets I'd tried to forget. I saw my mistakes, my losses, each memory sharper and more painful than the last, and through it all, the figure watched, its hollow eyes tracking me, feeding on my despair. At some point, I stopped running. My body was numb, my thoughts foggy. The labyrinth wanted me to give up, to surrender. And for a moment, I considered it. The shadowed figure's voice filled my mind, urging me to stay, promising relief, release. But then a glimmer of clarity cut through the fog. I remembered why I'd come here, my love for exploring, for finding hidden places. I remembered the thrill of discovery, the beauty of solitude. And I realized that if I gave in, if I let the labyrinth consume me, I would lose all of that. I would become just another shadow in its twisted corridors, a ghost trapped forever. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The shadows swirled, the figure's face twisted in anger, but I held my ground, refusing to be afraid. Slowly, I turned my back on it, ignoring the whispers, the illusions. I walked with purpose, not looking back, not letting the shadows take hold. I could feel the labyrinth shifting around me, its walls pressing in, but I kept moving, focusing on each step, each breath. And then, suddenly, I saw light, a faint, golden glow breaking through the shadows. I stumbled forward, my heart racing, and there it was, the entrance, the way out. I didn't hesitate. I ran, bursting through the opening, the cool desert air hitting me like a wave. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rocks, but the air felt fresh, alive, filled with the sounds of the desert. I turned back, expecting to see the entrance, a dark figure looming behind me. But the labyrinth was gone. Just the natural rock formations, the winding paths of Hidden Valley. I stood there, breathing hard, my mind reeling. The shadows and whispers were gone, but their memory lingered, etched into my mind like scars. As I made my way back to the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting. Even now, as I drive away from Hidden Valley, I can feel it. The keeper's presence, the weight of the labyrinth. It's as if the maze left a mark on me, a reminder that it's always there, lurking, waiting to draw me back. And sometimes in the quiet moments, I hear a faint whisper in the back of my mind, calling me back to the labyrinth where my fears still wait, bound in shadows that will never truly let go. I arrived at Devil's Ridge around dusk, just as the last golden light slipped behind the mountains, casting the valley below into shadow. The view was breathtaking. The ridge overlooked a vast, seemingly endless stretch of forest, a sea of dark green that rippled with the wind. I'd been craving solitude, a chance to clear my mind, and Devil's Ridge seemed like the perfect place to be alone with my thoughts. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves, the kind of stillness that I'd always found comforting. But as I parked my RV and stepped out into the fading light, a strange feeling settled over me, a prickling at the back of my neck. I brushed it off as first-night jitters. The wilderness can play tricks on you, especially when you're alone. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite name, and I noticed several stone markers scattered along the cliff's edge. Each one was worn with age, marked with strange symbols that looked almost like protective sigils. I leaned closer to one of the stones, trying to decipher the faded carvings. They reminded me of ancient wards I'd seen in folklore books, symbols meant to keep something out, or perhaps to keep something in. I shook off the thought and stepped back, taking in the vast expanse of forest stretching out before me. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something eerie about it, something that made the forest feel less like a part of nature and more like a boundary. As the sun disappeared, an intense quiet settled over the valley. I set up a small campfire, watching as the shadows deepened, stretching out toward the cliff's edge. The silence pressed down on me, thick and oppressive, as if the whole valley were holding its breath. That night, I sat by the fire, staring out over the edge of Devil's Ridge, feeling a strange urge to keep watching. Just as I was beginning to lose myself in thought, a low, rhythmic sound drifted up from the valley below. It was barely a whisper, a distant chant that I could almost convince myself was the wind. But as I listened, I realized it wasn't random. There was a pattern, a strange cadence to it. I strained to hear, my heart beating faster as the chant grew louder, like voices rising from the depths of the valley. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, a warning, something old and insistent. I laughed nervously, feeling foolish. The valley had a reputation after all, legends about a spirit known as the Keeper, a guardian who protected the land, keeping outsiders from discovering whatever secrets lay hidden in these woods. It was an eerie story, but a good one, and I'd come to Devil's Ridge hoping to experience a bit of that mystery firsthand. But now, as the voices faded into silence, leaving me alone with the whispering wind, I felt less like an explorer and more like an intruder. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up feeling that prickling sensation, as if eyes were on me from just beyond the firelight. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, flickering and twisting, but whenever I looked directly at them, there was nothing there. The next morning, I woke groggy, my sleep broken by fitful dreams of voices and dark figures. I set out to explore, determined to shake off the unease from the night before. The morning light was a relief, casting the ridge in a soft golden glow, but as I wandered, I kept noticing those strange stone markers scattered along the edge of the cliff, half hidden in the underbrush. One in particular caught my attention, a large, flat stone, half buried in the dirt, etched with the words, "Trespassers beware." I knelt beside it, brushing the dirt from the carved letters, feeling a chill settle over me. I looked around, suddenly aware of how alone I was, the ridge stretching out in every direction, vast and silent. The stones, the whispers, everything seemed like a warning, as if the valley itself didn't want me here. As I stood, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the ridge, watching me. My heart skipped a beat as I turned, expecting to see someone there, but there was no one. Just the empty air and the quiet valley stretching below. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light or my mind playing games, but I couldn't shake the image, that faint outline of a person standing still, watching. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains again, the same chant echoed up from the valley, soft and haunting, filling the air with that strange, rhythmic hum. This time, it was louder, more insistent, as if whatever was down there wanted me to hear it. I stood at the cliff's edge, peering down into the valley, my pulse quickening, and then, out of the fading light, I saw him. A figure, tall and shadowed, stood at the very edge of the ridge, just a few yards away, his back to me, facing out toward the valley. His form was indistinct, almost like smoke, shifting and blending with the darkening shadows, but his presence was undeniable, a cold, heavy weight that settled over me. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just stood there, a silent sentinel watching over the valley. And then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he was gone, vanishing into the shadows as if he'd never been there. A chill ran down my spine. I backed away from the cliff, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The keeper, I realized with a jolt that I'd just seen him, the spirit who was said to guard this land, watching over it with an unwavering gaze. I retreated to my campfire, the comfort and warmth doing little to calm my nerves. As night fell, the valley seemed to close in, the trees leaning toward me, the shadows stretching long and dark. The chanting grew louder, filling the air with that strange, ancient rhythm, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing at the edge of the cliff, his dark form merging with the shadows, his hollow eyes fixed on me. The next morning, I decided to leave. The valley's beauty had lost its charm, replaced by a growing sense of terror that gnawed at my thoughts. I packed up quickly, but as I turned to leave, I saw him again, standing just at the edge of the trees, watching me. I froze, my heart pounding, but this time, he didn't disappear. He stood there, silent and still, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim morning light. What do you want?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. In response, a voice filled my mind. Not words, but images. Visions of people stumbling through the valley, lost and afraid, their faces twisted in terror. I saw flashes of people wandering in circles, of hands clawing at dirt, of cries echoing through the trees, swallowed by the silence. The images faded, leaving me breathless, and I understood. The valley was his, a place of ancient power, a place that wasn't meant to be disturbed. I'd crossed a line, trespassed on sacred ground, and the keeper demanded respect. I knew what I had to do. With shaking hands, I reached into my backpack and pulled out the one thing that mattered most to me, a pendant my mother had given me, a small silver charm that had always brought me comfort. It was a part of me, a piece of my past, and as much as it hurt, I knew I had to let it go. I walked to the edge of the cliff, my steps heavy, and placed the pendant on one of the stone markers, bowing my head in a silent apology. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I didn't mean to disturb you." For a moment, there was silence, thick and heavy, pressing down on me like a weight. And then, slowly, the chanting faded, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the morning light broke through the trees. When I looked up, the figure was gone, and the valley seemed peaceful, as if I'd been granted a reprieve. I didn't waste any time. I packed up and left Devil's Ridge, the weight of what I'd seen lingering with me, a reminder of the ancient power that guarded this place. As I drove away, I glanced back one last time, catching a glimpse of the valley in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw him, standing at the cliff's edge, watching me leave. But as I blinked, he was gone, swallowed by the shadows. And though I'd escaped, I knew that a part of me would always remain on Devil's Ridge, a silent offering to the keeper, a reminder of the night I'd come too close to the valley's haunting, eternal gaze. I thought I was alone in Blackwood Forest. The towering pines and thick underbrush closed me in, muffling the sounds of the world. It was perfect for a camping trip, and with my RV parked along an isolated trail, I felt free from the weight of my everyday life. I'd wanted peace, quiet, and a little adventure, and I'd found it. But what I didn't know was that Blackwood Forest held more than solitude. My first day was peaceful enough. I spent hours wandering the trails, the earthy smell of pine and moss filling the air. By dusk, I decided to stray from the marked paths, hoping to discover something unique. An artifact, an old ruin, anything to make the trip feel like more than just an escape. That's when I found the clearing. The sunlight was fading, casting long shadows through the trees, and there, half buried in the earth, was a strange object. It was a mask, carved from wood but worn and cracked, as though it had been lying in the dirt for centuries. Intricate symbols circled the eyes and mouth, faded but still visible. As I picked it up, a chill shot through my fingers. The mask was cool to the touch, oddly heavy, and for a moment, I felt a strange pull, like it was asking me to put it on. I shook off the feeling, brushing it off as excitement. I'd never seen anything like it, and despite the unease twisting in my stomach, I couldn't bring myself to leave it behind. I brought it back to my RV, ignoring the prickling sense that I'd done something wrong. As night fell, Blackwood Forest grew quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, filling every corner with darkness. I set the mask on the table, planning to research it in the morning. I told myself it was just a piece of history, a relic left behind by an ancient tribe. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I dreamed of a fire burning in the middle of the forest, surrounded by figures in shadow. They wore masks similar to the one I'd found, their faces hidden but their bodies swaying in rhythmic motions. They chanted in low, mournful tones, a sound that seemed to fill every corner of my mind, building into a hum that vibrated through my bones. When I woke, my heart was pounding, and the chanting still echoed faintly in my ears. I sat up, trying to shake off the dream, and glanced toward the table. The mask was there, right where I'd left it, but somehow it felt different. The symbols seemed darker, more defined, as if they'd been freshly carved, and the mask's hollow eyes looked back at me, almost alive, like they were watching my every move. A chill ran down my spine, and I forced myself to look away. It was just my imagination, I told myself. Nothing more. But when I stepped outside, something caught my eye. Strange markings covered the ground around the RV, intricate symbols etched into the dirt similar to those on the mask. My stomach tightened as I realized the symbols seemed to circle the RV, almost as if they were trapping me inside. Throughout the day, I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, but as the sun dipped below the trees, strange things began to happen. The wind picked up, rustling the trees in strange patterns, and I heard faint whispers as though someone, or something, was calling to me from deeper in the woods. When I went back inside, I noticed something chilling. The mask had moved. It now sat on the edge of the table facing the door, as if it had been waiting for me to come back. My pulse quickened, and I tried to convince myself that I must have bumped the table, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. I considered leaving the mask in the clearing, abandoning it, but something stopped me. Part of me felt a strange pull, a compulsion to keep it close. It was as if the mask was sinking its hooks into me, making it harder to let go. That night, the whispering grew louder, filling the air with strange words I couldn't understand. Shadows flickered at the edges of my campsite, darting between the trees. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. I wanted to leave, to drive away from Blackwood Forest and never look back. But as I started the RV, the headlights flickered and the engine sputtered before dying completely. I tried again, my hands trembling, but the RV refused to start. I was trapped. I sat inside, staring at the mask, my fear growing with each passing minute. It was just a piece of wood, I told myself, nothing more. But the longer I looked at it, the more I felt an urge, a need to wear it. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the smooth, cold surface. The second my skin touched it, the whispers grew louder, filling my mind with images I didn't understand. I saw people dressed in ancient clothing, their faces hidden behind similar masks, dancing around a fire under a dark sky. They chanted in a language that resonated in my bones, their voices merging into a single, haunting call. Without thinking, I lifted the mask, bringing it closer to my face. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the RV window, a hollow expression filling my eyes. I could feel the weight of the mask in my hands, the strange pull urging me to put it on. But a sudden thought snapped me out of it. I dropped the mask, pulling my hand back as though I'd been burned. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I backed away, my mind racing. I couldn't let it control me. I had to get rid of it. But then the shadows moved. Figures began to emerge from the edge of the forest, their faces obscured by darkness. They were wearing masks like the one I'd found, each figure standing silently, their heads tilted as they watched me. I felt the air grow colder, the weight of their gaze pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. They moved closer, their steps slow, deliberate, and I realized they were pushing me toward the clearing, guiding me back to where I'd found the mask. I stumbled out of the RV, the mask clutched in my hands, feeling the pull growing stronger, urging me to return it to its place. When I reached the clearing, the masked figures stopped, forming a circle around me, their bodies swaying in rhythm, just like in my dream. Their low chanting filled the air, the sound vibrating through the ground, through my bones, as if the whole forest was alive with their voices. I knelt down, placing the mask back on the ground where I'd found it. But as I did, a shadowy figure appeared in front of me, a tall, ancient-looking man wearing an elaborate mask, his eyes dark and hollow. His presence was overwhelming, his gaze piercing through me, filling me with a sense of dread I couldn't describe. He raised his hand, gesturing for me to rise. My body moved on its own, following his command, and I felt a surge of cold rush through me as he spoke, his voice a deep, guttural whisper. "You have taken what was not yours," he said, his tone filled with sorrow and anger. "Now you must join us." I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "No, I didn't mean to." But his gaze held me in place, and the masked figures around us began to close in, their whispers growing louder, their hands reaching out toward me. Desperation took over. I took a step back, raising my hands in surrender. "Please, I'll return it. I'll leave it here. Just let me go." The figure paused, his dark eyes studying me. For a moment, the chanting stopped, the forest falling into an unnatural silence. Then he lowered his hand, nodding slowly. "You must leave now. But know this, you carry the mark of the forest. Return here, and you will not escape again." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and bolted back to the RV, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadows faded as I left the clearing, and by the time I reached the RV, the engine roared to life on the first try, as if it had been waiting for me to finish what I'd started. As I drove out of Blackwood Forest, dawn broke over the horizon, casting a faint light over the trees. But even as I put miles between myself and that cursed clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I still feel it, the weight of the mask's pull, the faint whispers that echo in my mind whenever I'm alone. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I see shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, as if the spirit of Blackwood Forest is reminding me of the mark I carry, a mark that will never let me forget what I disturbed. And though I tell myself I'll never return to Blackwood Forest, a part of me wonders if it would be safer to go back.